I say to you, citizens, beware the Ides of September. Very famously, in around 45 BC, Julius Caesar consulted a mysterious oracle, and this woman told him to beware the Ides of March. Sure enough, 44 BC, in March, Caesar was assassinated by no fewer than 60 Roman senators who all took turns to stab him so that no one person could be accused of this crime. Now, what does this have to do with us here in the modern world? Well, the Ides of March are coming, sort of start around about the 13th, the Ides of September, they kind of start around about the 13th, and there's things going on. The first thing that goes on, there is a Fed meeting. Now, the Fed is going to release a number of things, as well as a statement on increasing interest rates. They're also going to release their projections for the US economy, which have traditionally been a little more sceptical than the government. And we all know that even the government is now having to start to admit that, well, maybe things aren't quite as good as they've been portrayed. And the American economy is so big it could well drag the whole world down with it. In fact, most people predict it will. And the Fed are kind of damned if they do, and damned if they don't. And financial experts don't really know which way it's going to go. Some of them say that the Fed has to raise interest rates because they've been too low, i.e. zero, for too long. A very small minority of experts say that the Fed will actually go to negative interest rates. That means you pay to hold your money in banks, which obviously the banks would think is a pretty good idea. And a lot of experts reckon that the Fed cannot raise interest rates because then the US will not be able to afford to pay the interest on its debts. So why do I say they're damned if they're right and damned if they're wrong? Well, because if the Fed does raise interest rates, the first thing that's going to happen is a horrendous stock market crash. And this will only be an apparent crash, for reasons which I'll talk about shortly. But nevertheless, people won't like it. The next thing that will happen is the US government will have difficulty meeting its debts, and they will have to tighten the screws in the form of taxes and withdrawal of benefits even harder on the American people than they are at the moment. Now, obviously that would be a very bitter pill to swallow and could spark a worldwide panic. Now, let's say the Fed decide they're not going to raise rates. If the Fed don't raise rates, then that is an admission that the American economy basically is in the toilet. And all those people who have investments in America, they're going to look at this and they're going to say that maybe it's time to get out. Especially people like the Chinese who are already bailing. I mean, they might know something that we don't. They might know that the Fed is actually going to go for not raising interest rates and another round of QE4, which also a lot of people have predicted. And if QE4 happens, the American currency will be very devalued. And this won't be apparent to most people. Let's have a talk about currencies and why this won't be apparent. The American currency is measured against a basket of other currencies. And if all the currencies are affected in the same way, i.e. downwards, not much change will occur there. And so the currencies exchange rate to each other will remain relatively stable. So what effect does devaluation have? The currency will actually buy less goods. The currencies worldwide will actually buy less goods. The price of gold ought to go up, although, and this is one of the crash indicators that I talked about in my previous video. But there's so much manipulation going on, who knows what's going to happen. But already gold is being exchanged, I've heard, for multiples of its actual paper value on the futures market. So the price of gold on the futures market is not actually the price of gold anymore. So yeah, so if that's the way they go, they've got a problem. And if they go to negative interest rates, well, it's not going to be very popular with anyone, anywhere, and it would be political suicide, so I very much doubt if they would do that. So let's move on from any chaos that might be caused by the results of the Fed meeting, and we'll go to the 25th of September, when the Pope is due to address the United Nations. I believe he's also going to make a visit to the White House, perhaps also to Congress. And there's been a bit of a leak, and he is expected to lay the blame for all the ills of the Western world fairly and squarely at the doors of capitalism. And you might say, well, the Pope's a religious leader, what difference does this make? Well, if you do some research into the Vatican, you'll find out that actually the Roman Catholic Church is an enormous, enormous financial power. Not only do they own properties and companies and churches, obviously, and monasteries all over the world, but they have quite large gold reserves. They have a lot of influence with people in high positions. And if they have a down on capitalism, then what is going to replace it? And the answer is we don't know. Because the war has been between capitalism and communism all these years, and there are surprisingly plenty of communist Roman Catholic priests, especially in South America. So, the spectre of the seizing wholesale of capital and goods from the wealthy on the horizon, it is no wonder that the wealthy are panicking. Now all these things are happening at the same time. Surprise, surprise. And it may take some months for the repercussions to actually be felt, in the full repercussions to be felt, because as always people need time to sit back and analyse these things, and the politics of it needs time to play out, and we need to see which way the government jumps, and all these things do take time. So whilst the Fed could cause an immediate market crash by raising the interest rate, say up to 0.25%, and remember that normal interest rates are around 5 or 6%. That's just to say that's about the average of what they've always been. And they're currently at 0, so 0.25% rise, you might say, well, it's nothing really. But that's not the case when you're talking about hundreds of trillions of dollars of debt. It's the difference between hardly paying anything and paying one hell of a lot. And at the moment, the government is hardly paying anything. So I'm going to move on now, having talked a bit about the Pope and religion, and let's have a look at something a bit more oddball.
And now for the more mystical part of this presentation. Now, some of you may have heard of this, and this is the Global Consciousness Project, which you can have a look at www.global-mind.org. And what this is that there's a set of random number generators that are all networked together, and they're situated as near as possible worldwide. Obviously there's concentrations in various countries which are more amenable to scientific research than, shall we say, others. However, there are even some in China, and the theory is that these random number generators are influenced by human consciousness. And indeed there does seem to be a lot of correlation between large, especially bad events in the world, and variations in the pattern of the numbers that are produced. So let's have a look at 9/11. Here is a graph, and as you can see, this is when the attack happened on 9/11, massive peak. But the interesting thing, as with all of these, is that the variance starts to stack up days beforehand, which implies a level of premonition on the part of the human consciousness of the globe as a whole. Mind you, they don't really know that what they're measuring is actually human consciousness. It might be the Earth itself, who knows? And the interesting thing is that right at this moment we are starting to see an uptick on this statistical variance. So this tells us that possibly something is going to happen soon. And I'll leave you with that rather mystical thought. Please go out and check out the Global Consciousness Project yourself. And there is a film that goes with it, which you can click on from their website, which explains all about it and some of the results. And it's very interesting viewing. And I hope you find this presentation just as interesting. And if you do, please like, share and subscribe. Thank you very much.
Harmonic, ionic, bionic, atomic. It will astonish you. It's magical and casual, actual but classical, practical and factual. Arduinotronic, harmonic, ionic, bionic, atomic. It will astonish you. It's magical